Isambard King of Brunel had an accident when the Thames Tunnel flooded between Rotherhithe and Wapping in the late 1820s, and he was unemployed and took a long time to recover from his accident. But one of his very first jobs was here at Tollesbury in Essex. I'd never heard of Tollesbury until I read about Brunel, but any author was only going to give you 2 or 3 sentences about Brunel's work here. So when I arrived at Tollesbury, I thought I would take a generic picture of the marshes. But when I was asking for information, I came across Paul Drake, one of the descendants of a Drake family who were working on these marshes, helping Brunel. I am at the Old Hall Marshes, and along here in 1825 the sea breached the wall and entered and ruined the soil inside on the marshland, and Brunel was commissioned to drain it, and he acquired a siphon pump from Maudsley, Sons and Field at Lambeth, and the components were shipped up here in Essex barges into these creeks. And Brunel was employed by the Bennett family, Edward Bennett for example, and Brunel had visited the Bennett house, which is about a third of a mile behind where I'm standing, and I've just visited the house. It dates from the early 14th century. Brunel would have visited his employer and may have stayed there. So that was an extra venue for the project, which didn't cross my mind when I left home. Also we include, this was the Ship Ahoy pub on the right of the picture, which the present owner said is 300 years old. So Brunel could have been refreshed in there during the era where this was a community setting. We're going to pan the camera over to the marshes via the creek, so we're going to turn to the left and keep turning, and this is the marshland into which Brunel was draining the water over this sea wall. The sea wall was originally behind me on the video, which we can turn the camera and see the sea walls being repaired with ironwork there, but you can see some stonework in the foreground. So this is an example. The sea wall would have gone on for a few miles protecting the interior. So we'll pan the camera to the left and go over to the marshes, and as we pan the camera you will see the land rising above the level of the sea, and behind the fence to the left of the camera you will get into the marshes on the left hand side. Brunel had a siphon pump, and he would come up here and he would move it into different positions, and one position that we know he was in was Penny Hole Fleet, which is 3 kilometers exactly in that direction, and the water would have been pumped over the sea wall on the north side of this peninsula of marshland. And then on one diary entry Brunel came here and said that the pump was moved to the south. And one surprising piece of exciting information was when I read in the local book supplied to me by Paul Drake and a resident here, Brunel had in his diary an entry that on September the 23rd, on a Sunday, September 25th in 1831, he attended the Church of the Virgin St Mary in Tollesbury, and he said that C. Bennett provided a very enjoyable sermon. I've been to the church. It's an extra example of touching Brunel. And Brunel is not widely associated with Essex because he wasn't at all well known by then, except that when he did leave the Thames Tunnel, he was written up in the Times newspaper as a very brave man who had worked very hard in trying to build the doomed project of the Thames Tunnel, which did get finished around 1843 by Brunel's father. But in this area, when Brunel was visiting Tollesbury, for example, when he left London, he had breakfasted in Brentford. He took a chaise at Chelmsford, which was a taxi in those days. It was like a pony in a carriage. And then when he went to Malden, he bought a map of Essex. He passed through Danbury, which he said it was a beautiful spot, and he was looking for a man who was associated with him. And he couldn't find this man, so he went off to Tillingham, where he was found that Mr. Matson was, and he took Matson to Bradwell Farm and expected the sea wall there. And on one of the visits up here, he alighted at Colchester to come to Tollesbury, and on one afternoon he went shooting in Thorpe. So that's Brunel's diary, which was recreated by a local man who wrote for the history of this area. But it becomes an impossible dream to write the full life of Brunel, because if you're living here thousands of days and you keep a diary, it's very difficult to encompass everything into one man's life. So I'm trying to put into the book and into the picture library what I'm doing about Brunel is exposing some of the fine minutiae of this man's life. Thanks for your attention.